Kiara, I'll be talking about fragility and potential threats to life. So if there's any time you feel like you need to leave, please feel free to do so. And with that content warning, let's go. Telephones changed the way we communicated and thus live. It's, well, why we're all here. It enabled us to communicate instantly beyond our national borders and thus our supply chains. But it also created new gaps in our local self-sufficiency. The impact of this became clear when, well, the pandemic hit and supply chains were disrupted, leaving, well, shelves empty. So how did we get here? This unease still kind of lives rent-free in my head today. However, a light bulb went off one day when I was doing some work on your standard risk register. Risk, very high. Impact, potential death of multiple people. Likelihood, moderate. We've seen about a handful of these happen in the last year, but we've already externalized the liability of that risk. Cyber insurance. So based on our risk appetite policy, well, we accept the risk. Well, hold up. Potential death of multiple people, risk accepted? That doesn't seem quite right. To use video games as an analogy, I was managing a risk register for an organization, playing with multiple respawns available. But as a human, it's like I'm playing a single attempt, zero death speed run, right? So that's a very different difficulty model and risk level. A very different game. That mismatch, it's why it felt like I was playing a very different game, because it was. Also, what you, me, value as a person, it's not the same as the fiduciary duty and values of a business. And as a cybersecurity professional hired by the business, it is in the business interest that I was managing these concerns for. So, what can we as individuals do about it? Like, well, any security professional, we can too assess the risk and make a plan to manage that. But instead of doing it on the business's behalf, we can do it for ourselves. To make a plan, a sensible thing to do is to first understand the operational landscape and its influencing factors. This helps us decide how we should act, taking into consideration our own priorities, what we can afford, and what we're willing to live with. Things are expensive, right? As an example, many people die in traffic accidents yearly, but most of us still get into a car, right? Since it's not practical to fully consider all possibilities, we can use a threat model to help us better understand what we should be concerned about. So, what scenarios are we threat modeling? A quick way to understand dependency is to simply turn the system off and see what breaks. So, let's go with an extreme scenario, because if we're prepared for this, anything lesser is easier. So, our scenario. So, what happens when a whole country, say Australia, because from Melbourne, or Aotearoa, suddenly fully disconnects from the greater internet? Without even trying, we have a gut feeling that it ain't gonna be pretty. And well, the recent CrowdStrike incident gave us a canary into the consequence. And I'm from Australia, and fortunately for this threat model, we're an island, and the likelihood that an incident that would disconnect us from the internet isn't that far-fetched. There are only 15 cables that connect us to the outside world, and all pass through earthquake fault lines and contentious waters. Well, Kiwis, you're well aware of this and are way more impacted by it than us across the Tasman. 6 cables connect you all to the outside world, and 3 of those to Australia? Uh-oh. If I remember correctly, PG even did a presentation about this here at ShareCon a few years ago, I think. It's a concern. Cutting of undersea cables is an issue that happened in our neighborhood more than a few times in the last few years. There's even an article just a few months old about the concern. Heck, shortly after that theoretical article, we get this headline. This was supposed to be fiction, but here we are. So, if we're using, say, the NIST 830 risk assessment guidance, from the articles we have just seen, the likelihood of a disconnection incident is, well, moderate. A sign that probably should be preparing for it. That's us keeping this an OSI layer 1, a physical layer disconnection. We could potentially argue that, well, the likelihood is lower because there are 50 cables and, well, 6 to our Torah. But we could also argue otherwise, as we have not even considered being disconnected due to a BGP misconfiguration, which happens way more frequently. Let's not even start with the complexities of staying legally compliant, especially if they conflict with local laws and norms. And I'm not a lawyer, so not going to touch that. So let's get it to a physical disconnection for our scenario. Now that we have our scenario, and we know we can't quite model every service and dependency, that'll be unrealistic, and we'll be here for far too long, and let's break after this. So let's pick an example system to try and model. Email? I choose you. So why email? It's a well-known public standard, a well-known commodity service that everyone depends on. Its parts are comparatively more transparent than services like, say, payments, which are significantly more regulated, and repositories like PyPy, Docker, NPM, which are way more complex, wrapped in IP and stuff, than we need for our example. Our email address serves as a proxy of our identities. It acts as our formal communications channels online. It's practically the anchor of our digital identity, including government agencies. In the US, it's ID.me, and Australian MyGov, including the tax office in Australia. And if you might even have needed one to enter Aotearoa. It also serves as legal records for our purchases, agreements, and communications. That last contract you signed, I'd bet there's a high likelihood that it was delivered to you via email. When was the last time you signed up for an account and did not need to provide an email address? Without an email address, we are effectively dead in this digital-first environment. So, seems rather important, eh? I'd say it's a good place to start our trend analysis. So, email. Simple, right? Surely we've got this. Let's dig in. For many, our interactions with email is via an email service provider, which handles it all for us as a service, including clients we interact with, like iCloud, Mail, if you're Apple ecosystem, Microsoft Outlook, and Google's Gmail. Maybe a bit of Proton Mail if you're privacy conscious. However, for many of us here, how many of us here have looked at exactly how email works? For people like my parents, email's just one magical thing that I get email in. But email's made of more than that. There's a bunch of standards and dependencies that make email work. So what makes up email? Here's a list of some related RFCs. There's lots that we can dig into, but let's focus on some of the dependencies rather than the protocol description. So painting very, very broad strokes and glossing over a lot of things. What are some of the dependencies for an email to be sent from one address to another, say from one .au address to another? So, well, let's start with the obvious, the domain name. That's how we know which IP address to connect to the phone book, right? And how we're going to route those packets. Our local ISPs How the local ISPs help the packets find their way, move email packets about. Certificates. TLS and modern email security heavily depends on these for encryption and authentication. And, well, your email gets dropped by Microsoft and Google if you don't have TLS, right? Then there's the email software, your MDA, your mail delivery agent, your mail user agent, and your mail transfer agent. Thing that sends, receives, view emails. And then there's the operating system it runs on. But let's not chase that rabbit. That's another rabbit hole of dependencies. With a quick refresh on how email kind of like gets from one place to the other, let's do a quick threat model of email. So, quick reminder. The scenario we're working with is that Australia suddenly and fully gets disconnected, or Aotearoa gets fully disconnected from the global internet. Let's start with some common email as a service provider. Let's ask 3 very simple questions. Are the email service with my data physically in Australia or Aotearoa? Will we be able to access and download our email from within Australia? Will we be able to send and receive emails to and from a .autld to a .autld, so we're not even going .com, right? We'll look at 4 providers: Microsoft Outlook, Gmail, ProtonMail, and, well, Fastmail. So let's start with Microsoft Outlook because, well, a lot of us are familiar with that, and a lot of talk about Microsoft today. It has data residency options for their enterprise accounts. It mentions storage of data at rest of Exchange Online mailbox content. But I couldn't find anything about personal Outlook or Microsoft accounts besides this small snippet in the privacy policy. Okay. Quick question, if I can see through the lights. When you select a data residency region in, say, Australia, if, say, Central US or US Central or US West went offline, would you still be able to access, read, and send emails? If I can see through, raise your hands if you think so. No? Yeah? Yeah? Can you still use your emails? No? No hands? Okay. Thanks. Thanks. I'm not sure. You think it would? There's DNS, which is relying on the .com TLD route, but that might be cached, so maybe? Well, then there's this. Well, as you can see from this incident in July this year, the ability to access is down because off is down. So despite having the data physically near me, we had no way to access it because the gates are offline. This status page is for Azure, sure, but we all know, where Microsoft Outlook runs. But it raises the question, right? Since we cannot access the service, is sending and receiving email possible? Okay, moving on. Gmail or Google Workspace. It has data regions for Workspace Enterprise, but it's only US and Europe. So it doesn't quite help our scenario, being Southern Hemisphere. It covers data rest and processing. I couldn't find anything about personal Gmail accounts. But, well, this outage in 2020, it even affected the EU. So I'm guessing we in Australia and Aotearoa won't be able to log in either. Well, Proton is helping us out here. We see that sending and receiving emails to be a problem, as this tweet from Proton shows. Speaking of Proton Mail. It's proudly based in Switzerland, including their infrastructure, so it's clear no to all three questions. If we can't reach it, there's little we can do. Okay, Fastmail, yay! So, okay, this is hopeful. It's an Australian company. Well, sadly, their infrastructure is based out of New Jersey and Seattle. So I'd say no to all three questions here too, if we can't reach it because the cables are cut. Well, here's a quick review of what we've learned. Only Microsoft came close, but that's for their enterprise account, and even that's kind of like uncertain. To be clear, these aren't criticisms of this service or the resilience engineering that all this service have put into their products. Resilience engineering is very hard and requires a lot of effort that often goes undervalued. This shows it. However, it's good to understand how our dependencies may be impacted in an incident scenario where a full compromise of availability happens, especially for something so critical. All right, so can we even run these ourselves with free open source software if we wanted to? Self-host, right? r/self-host. Let's talk through the dependencies. Remember these from earlier? Cool. Domain name. To keep things simple, we'll keep it to .au keep it to the .au TLD, or if you want, place that with the .nz TLD. Looking at the .au TLD, the .au root servers point to an IP address owned by the AU Domain Administration Limited, AUDA, in Australia, which is directly peered with multiple local ISPs. These servers are run by Identity Digital Australia with local staff and infrastructure. Cool. Okay. Following the verification journey, let's check if these servers are actually local. Let's dig trace a .au domain. Okay, INA root servers, not in Australia, but those are well-known zone files. So these are well-known zone files for the .au TLD, can be downloaded. So cool. Local recursive DNS resolvers would likely have these bootstraps. And these are very well-known TLD roots on INA. Yep. Ooh, yes. Yeah, that's INA's website. From the IP addresses, we can see that one of the AUDA ASN and the one is the AUDA ASN and the rest are Affilias ASNs. If we ping this, they have a response time of about 30 milliseconds TTL, which means it's local. Looking through their peering, yeah, that kind of makes sense as they are directly paired with local ISPs. Looks like the .au DNS will keep working. We know local ISP peering is pretty solid in Australia and Aotearoa because of our remoteness. Remoteness means it's very costly to route traffic internationally. So, being an island and all that works in our advantage, right? So let's just say we've got this in the bag and we're good here. So let's move on to the digital certs. Well, that gets a bit dicey. Looking up the common CADB that the Linux Foundation maintains, and it's kind of used as a source of root certs, we sadly find no Australian CAs except for that one by the Australian Department of Defence. For good measure, a search for New Zealand and Aotearoa also did not return any results. Well, crap. So that means either the DoD starts issuing certs or we're pretty much stuck with whatever time we have remaining on existing TLS certs or self-signed certs. That's a maximum of 90 days for Let's Encrypt certificates. So that means we create a new CA to issue it to everyone, use self-signed certs, or turn off all the PKI verification stuff off if we become disconnected from the global network. As for email software, ARNet, Australia's Research Network and ISP, maintains a mirror of various Linux distributions, source codes, and packages. So at the risk of following another rabbit hole of dependencies, let's just say we're good on that front too. So if you're keeping score, it looks like IP, DNS, and email software, all that will keep chugging along, good on that front. However, yeah, we seem to have a capability gap in issuing like digital certs that are already all with root CAs on our machines. Yikes. That means if we were disconnected, we'll likely lose email, some instantly. Others, as certificates start to expire, since so much of modern emails relies on these certificates. Plus, we don't have any local capacity to switch to something, even if we wanted to, because, we don't really have that. Because we don't have a local CA. If we tried, how long would it take to reconfigure everything, right? That's just the technical reality of our dependency. Even without even considering the influences of business priorities, local, legal, regulatory, cultural expectations of the service, where the service provider is based. Yep. So, what can go wrong? Let's talk about the consequences. Imagine what life would be if you lost access to your mailbox. Finally, inbox zero, no notifications. Paradise, right? I wish. We saw how badly the CrowdStrike incident in July impacted us. It impacted food, fuel, transport, healthcare, critical systems' ability to communicate, and even access to our money. That impacted our ability to live our lives. Fortunately, this impact didn't last long. Through all the incredible efforts of many, 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 many people, got things back running in just a few days. So let us take a step back and ask, what in our lives depend on us having access to our email? We mentioned a few of these earlier. It's how we communicate. It's how we communicate. It's how we communicate with a government, banks, telco, healthcare, landlord, city council, and practically every aspect of our lives, including being notified of bills and other obligations. It serves as a proxy of our identity. It's used as logins for government IDs, and it's how we agree to transactions via email. How frequently do you still sign and post paper contracts or get confirmation on paper? It is used as logins to your bank, PayPal, etc. It's used where you send an email with a confirmation code, or even how we send money to each other. How long will you be able to survive without access to your current email? If CrowdStrike was bad, what if you woke up with access to our email provider gone? One dad found out after sending pictures of their kid to a doctor for diagnosis. He didn't even get his email back and got banned. Or wake up to find all your data deleted by mistake, like how one large Australian super fund did. Yikes. How will you and the ones you love do? Would it be fair to say that loss of email would be of catastrophic consequence? And that's just email. So, how digitally resilient do you think you are? Holy crap. Personally, I didn't know my life was that fragile. Remember the risk matrix from earlier? If we were to evaluate the consequence of our full disconnect scenario, it looks pretty similar, eh? Admittedly, we're still here, and you might say, if this scenario happens, then we are screwed, and it doesn't quite matter. But it doesn't have to be that way. What we learned from the threat model threat model and scenario is that there's a lot of risk. And we need to make sure that we truly understand that these cyber systems have very real impact on our lives. Now, we know what needs fixing. Let us all make it better. Well, when you talk about security, you usually hear the usual advice of, have backups, have an emergency plan, DR, etc. Have redundancy in your dependencies. Good general advice to start with, but we need to do more, as it doesn't quite address the issues we face. As seen in our threat model, there was practically no clear viable options for a service restoration with the current status quo. So, what can we collectively do to address the service availability risk we're dealing with? From a high level, we need more diversity in our supply chain. It gives us more real choice. For us to have resilience, we must first have a healthy diversity of providers and approaches necessary for a healthy population. We can learn from nature. Diverse ecosystems thrive and are resilient to threats. This includes diversity of environment and locale. That means ensuring that we have strong, competitive, and diverse market at every level. With that in mind, there are 3 actions we can take to drive the change we seek. Threat model our own life. Start with the actions that we can take ourselves to understand our own priorities and concerns. Then, choose better, demand better, and build better. Actions that we can directly influence to help drive the change we seek. One decision, one action at a time. But for longer-term success and prosperity, strengthen the commons. Public money means public code. Drive action to support a strong commons for the community to build upon, like, solid public infrastructure. Create a strong alternative that is not extractive. With strong rules of law, will create long-term benefits for everyone. But what about the economy? Well, it creates long-term benefits as well, at least according to the 2024 Nobel Prize of Economics winners' work. Seems solid. Let's dig deeper into these 3 actions we can take. Threat model your own life and make a plan you can live with. And, understand the constraints you're working with. Ask yourself, what do I depend upon? What happens if I no longer have access to it or the service becomes hostile? What can I do now? And how can I change my own behavior to minimize the impact that it has on me? Using our example scenario with the email and stuff, say number 1, email. I'd be screwed. We don't have to rehash the last few minutes of this. I could use my own domain and a backup local service provider. Can't do much about certs, but I can monitor that and have at least up to 45 days, thanks Apple, to figure that out. 2, choose better, demand better, build better. Demand real choice, demand diversity. Demand and build for interoperability at all levels of the supply chain. As the market moves, so will providers to fill the demand. Preferentially choose those providers that do, both in our job and our personal lives. Invest in your local community if you want to keep it. That means make data portability, interoperability, and support for open standards a requirement when choosing, and shop local. Don't make yourself a hostage. That's why the EU is pushing for digital sovereignty, so that it has the ability to act independently in the digital world. In practice, this doesn't need to be a big bang transition. Just add a bit more diversity into your supply chain and the things you choose as you go along. If you're no longer solely dependent, you're no longer at the whims of the service provider, like what Darth Vader did. I have altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it further. Big tech knows that. That's why they came together and created the Open Compute project. As a bonus, competition gives us a stronger negotiation position and reduces cost. However, for us to sustain the change in building a less fragile world, we must strengthen the commons. Public money, public code. We are seeing the EU do this. Why? Because it just makes sense. Engage in demand at various levels of government, use their buying power to strongly prefer public code, ensure that grants aren't just handouts, and increasingly privatize the commons with public money while socializing the risk. We've seen this time and time again. Drive better standards, competition, resilience throughout the years. We've seen these multiplying effects with the Linux Foundation, DARPA, CISA, NIST, NASA, and more. Heck, it gave us the internet. A strong commons enables us not to worry if the service provider is gone, is going to rug pull the features we rely on. It seems only fair that if taxpayers are paying for it, the whole taxpaying community should benefit, right? Economic arguments aside, in cybersecurity, we often say trust but verify. Public code allows us to do just that because, well, mistakes happen. It also enables us to keep the government accountable as more and more gets digitized. As a benefit, public code helps us create local capability. It also lowers the cost and barriers to entry, increasing diversity and competition. When the knowledge and capability is publicly available, we enable local providers to grow stronger together. Because what you as a person and what we as a community value is not the same as the legal duties of a business, especially an overseas business. To be clear, this is not a boo business bad, but to understand that our goals and priorities might be different, like this scene from The Last of Us. Securing our supply chain and reversing this digital fragility is a matter of survival. It is our freedom to choose and act independently. Our digital life is real life, and we only have one goal. By the way, if you found out how to respawn in this game, please let me know. It's not going to be easy. There are powerful opposing forces, as this year's Nobel Prize in Economics winner shows expected. So be prepared. Will we let this fragility crumble all life's efforts and future when the inevitable tide comes? No, it's a matter of survival. As hackers, we are creative, persistent, and resourceful. One small action at a time, and we can reclaim a resilient future where we thrive. And this is just the start. Let's hack for a better planet. What will you do? Thank you.
Busted.